this evening's public meeting for the Little Falls Parkway pilot project and traffic study. You will notice the time on the screen lists the meeting going from 7 p.m., which is now, to 9 p.m. The advertised time was to go to 8:30, and we have moved that back to 9 o'clock to allow more time for questions and answers. Next slide. So this will be a 2-hour meeting, as just mentioned. We will be kicking off with a presentation that will last approximately 45 minutes. We've got a lot of good information for you. We hope to answer a lot of questions in that presentation. We will then have about an hour and 15 minutes for questions and comments. We will have a hard stop at 9 o'clock because we know people, it's a work night and people need to get up tomorrow. So we will do our best to get to as many people as we can in terms of questions and comments. We have over 200 people pre-registered, and I know that we already have 146 people attending the webinar. So we are going to be really pressed to get to as many questions as we can, and we may not get to everybody. So apologies in advance for that. The meeting is being recorded, and slides that we're presenting today and the recording will be posted on the project webpage. You can see the link on the screen there. So to ask questions, please enter questions in the Q&A box. There will also be an opportunity to speak at the conclusion of the presentation. So feel free to answer questions now as we go through, but please note that we may well answer your question during the presentation section. And in that event, we may skip over the question in the Q&A to get to things that we may not have covered in as much depth. So as you're thinking about entering questions into the Q&A box, just keep that in mind. There will be other opportunities to share your questions and comments with us. You can email comments to lfp@montgomeryparks.org. And there'll be opportunities to share your views with the planning board at a hearing that is tentatively scheduled for March 23rd. So we look forward to that opportunity to hear from you as well. Next slide. So my name is Darren Fluchet. I'm the division chief for park planning and stewardship. And our primary presenters today are going to be Kyle Lucas, a trails planner in the Park Planning and Stewardship Division, and Andrew Sy, an engineer in our Park Development Division. We also have folks who will be available to answer questions at the end, including Andy Frank from the Park Development Division, Brian White, a consultant with Mead and Hunt, Lieutenant Sarah Mikalauskis from Park Police. And behind the scenes, we have Melissa Chotner, who is helping us with the logistics and will be responsible for allowing people to unmute themselves during the live question aspect at the end. So with that, oh, and we also have several people who are listening to the call today and who will be absorbing all the questions and comments. So that includes Mike Riley, who's the director of the Parks Department, and Mitty Figueredo, who is the deputy director of the Parks Department. On the call today, we also have Cindy Gibson, who is the chief of staff for Andrew Friedson, council member Andrew Friedson, and Matt Higgins, who is a staffer for council member Andrew Friedson. And they will be listening along tonight. And we have Joseph Swit of Delegate Mark Corman's office also listening. So we have a variety of people listening along tonight, and we will be relying on park staff and Brian White from Mead and Hunt to answer the more detailed questions. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kyle Lucas to begin the presentation.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kyle Lucas. I'm a trails planner with the Parks Department. Shown on the screen right now, our agenda for today. So we're going to start with a little background on Little Falls Parkway before talking about the Open Parkways program itself, then moving into some of the pilot project phasing, which includes the Open Parkways Phase 1 and Phase 2 of the pilot project. We'll then cover some of the vehicular traffic counts, providing an overview of that, then talking a little bit about the pilot park concept that we've developed, some common concerns, and then next steps. So again, we'll start by talking a little background on Little Falls Parkway. And so we've got a slide here that kind of highlights the purpose and need. So this project accomplishes a lot of priorities for the Parks Department, and in our opinion is kind of a win-win-win scenario that addresses a variety of needs. So the project provides a safe and functioning roadway. There have been several crashes along Little Falls Parkway, including a bicyclist fatality. The pre-pilot roadway design allowed drivers to exceed the posted speed limit at dangerous speeds, including reports of drag racing. Using Vision Zero best practices, we have helped to reduce vehicular speeds, which helps reduce the frequency and severity of crashes. We've also have a well-received Open Parkway program that you all are likely familiar with along this section, which unfortunately led to some neighborhood cut-through traffic. We've developed this pilot to test how Little Falls Parkway functions as a two-lane road with the goal of eliminating the unintended consequences of the neighborhood cut-through traffic due to the weekend closures. And finally, this project preserves the recreational open space that was popular during our Open Parkways program and can be developed into additional park space for the community. Additionally, an added benefit of this is having essentially the Open Parkway space available 24/7 instead of just on Saturday and Sunday. So this slide here shows a cross-section of the pre-pilot conditions between Arlington Road and River Road. We've got 2 northbound lanes, a grass median, as well as 2 southbound lanes. This provides kind of an aerial overview of it. You can see we've got 2 lanes in each direction, except for between Hillendale and Arlington, where we have the Capitol Crescent Trail safety improvements that we've made at the crossing previously. I'll hand it over to Andrew to talk about these slides now.
Thanks, Kyle. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Montgomery County is the first suburban county in the U.S. to adopt a Vision Zero action plan to reduce traffic fatalities and severe injuries. Parks coordinates with DOT and SHA on trail safety and traffic calming projects throughout the county. It's an ongoing CIP program. Next slide, please, Kyle. As mentioned earlier, reducing vehicle speeds is the most effective way of reducing conflict frequency and severity. The graphic here on the right highlights that at a 20 mile per hour impact with a pedestrian, the pedestrian has a 95% chance of survival. That drops to 55% at 30 miles an hour, and at 40 miles an hour, not looking great for the pedestrian. Survival rate has dropped to 15%. The driver cone of vision as well as reaction time also increases at slower speeds. So at 20 and 15 miles an hour, it allows a driver the greatest reaction time and time to respond to something shifting conditions in the roadway. Next slide, please. These 2 pictures highlight the Capitol Crescent Trail crossing and Little Falls Parkway, which is in between Arlington Road and Hillendale Road. In 2017, Parks implemented Vision Zero based safety improvements at the crossing. And to point out what those improvements are, you can see the flexible posts that were used to shut down 1 lane in each direction, as well as the installation of a raised crosswalk, which is sort of like a speed hump, a vertical deflection that forces cars to slow down as they approach the crossing. We also installed additional signage and other associated improvements. The next slide includes an aerial exhibit with the red outline of where the flexible posts were installed in order to implement the road diet.
It's also worth noting, as we're talking about the Capitol Crescent Trail crossing, that we do have plans to kick off a Capitol Crescent Trail facility plan looking at upgrades along the Capitol Crescent Trail. So this will involve its own separate outreach, as well as an existing conditions analysis, trail planning, trail design, and looking at amenities and trail connectivity as well. So we do have a process for Capitol Crescent Trail specific things moving forward. So now I'm going to dive into a little bit about the Open Parkways. Here are a couple pictures from Little Falls, Sligo Creek, and Beach Drive, which are 3 open parkways. We've seen a ton of use along these parkways and received a lot of positive feedback from a variety of users. Here's a timeline kind of for Little Falls Parkway itself. So we launched this in April 2020 in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and kept this in place until December 2020 when we suspended it for the winter months, in part due to operational challenges. When we suspended it, we received a lot of pushback asking for us to reinstate the open parkways, which I'll touch on in a second, but we reinstated it in March 2020 with a slightly smaller section. So originally it went from Massachusetts Avenue all the way up to Arlington Road, and we dropped the Massachusetts Ave to River Road section when we reinstated it. I've got a couple dates here which just show when we've conducted traffic counts, which we've done a few times, as well as when we suspended the open parkway program in June of 2022 and moved into phase 1. So I referenced this a second ago, but when we originally suspended the open parkways program, a petition was started to get us to reinstate that, which gathered almost 2,000 signatures. I've got some maps here showing the original extent. So again, from Massachusetts Ave all the way up almost to Fairfax Road. This was in place between April 2020 and November 2020. And when we reinstated it on a much smaller portion between River Road and almost Fairfax Road. So one of the things we've done throughout the Open Parkways program is we've monitored the use. So we have trail counters that we set up at several locations. We've had 2 on each of the open parkways. So we had one originally at Massachusetts Ave until that portion was dropped from the program, but we have had one at the Bethesda Pool location, essentially, 2 on Sligo Creek, 2 on Beach Drive. And using these trail counters, we've counted over 300,000 users between April of 2020 and June of 2022. This works out to be about 3,000 users per weekend. Here's a slide showing the user counts we had from that Bethesda Pool location. So you can see when we first started, this was extremely popular. We had some days with over 2,500 users. This right here, this kind of long stretch, that's when the Open Parkways program was suspended for the winter of 2020. And you can see it's roughly about the same. It's dropped a little since the beginning, but looking at just the 2022 counts up until June when we suspended the program, you can see that there's still pretty strong use. One of the highest days was actually almost exactly a year ago. I believe that was February 12th, and we had over 900 people. So even in colder months, we're still seeing a lot of use on the open parkways when we had those still in progress. Unfortunately, one of the negative effects of having Little Falls closed completely for the Open Parkways program is we did see an increase in neighborhood cut-through traffic. So this graph right here is showing the daily traffic volumes from a 7-day period in May when the Open Parkways program was still in place. And you can see we average about 1,000 vehicles a day, Monday through Friday. And then when the Open Parkways program was active on Saturday and Sunday, that number almost doubles. So this kind of leads us to our pilot project and our proposed solution. So we, in June, suspended the Open Parkways program in order to address and reduce that neighborhood cut-through traffic that we were receiving complaints about and that we monitored and recorded ourselves. And the idea then moving forward was to conduct a pilot project that we kind of developed with Montgomery County DOT, which included 2 lanes for traffic and 2 lanes for an open parkway, kind of open recreational space. So this kind of meets 2 goals. It helps to eliminate that cut through traffic from the weekend road closures. It helps us to keep that open parkway recreational space that we heard was so important when we originally suspended it. It's also a cost-effective way to create some additional park and recreational space, and also having 2 lanes of traffic has lower operational costs than maintaining all 4. Another thing to talk about, so Little Falls Parkway between Mass Ave and River Road is 2 lanes. The entirety of Beach Drive as well as Sligo Creek Parkway are also 2-lane roads. So part of this is kind of helping to create some consistency in the parkway experience across our parkways. And so, converting this from 4 lanes to 2 lanes helps to create that consistency. This slide kind of highlights some of the public input and process that we've gone through to this point. So I'm going to quickly cover this. So Again, we suspended the Open Parkway program in winter of 2020. We heard strong opposition to suspending that program with with over 1,900 signatures on a petition, but we still heard concerns about neighborhood cut-through traffic. So we began our kind of traffic data monitoring and collection, really looking at the impact on neighborhood streets. When the Open Parkways program was suspended in June and our pilot program was initiated, this was again due to the public input on the neighborhood cut-through traffic. We've conducted several rounds of traffic counts and monitored the impacts of phase 1 and phase 2. We've also made adjustments to phase 1 and phase 2 based on the public feedback we've heard. This is down to the placement of a single flex post, as well as adding additional flex posts in some locations. We've also done a few things to really try to be as transparent as possible. We've posted the traffic data to the pilot project website. We've issued press releases in advance of every change. And we've also taken the time to meet with residents and interested parties to help provide an overview of that traffic data, really try to help explain how to analyze that, read it, and what it says. So going through that whole process, we're now at a point where our pilot data collection is complete. And so we're now here hosting a public meeting, giving you all an opportunity to ask questions and make comments. We also have an email address set up, which is lfp@montgomeryparks.org. Feel free to send us comments there. We'll later in March be holding a public hearing with the planning board, and eventually then after that, asking the planning board to make a decision on maintaining the current configuration as it is for this pilot. Some of the things kind of helping us go, implement this pilot project, we have the pros plan. And in that, one of the recommendations is to acquire and develop more urban parks. So we're using some of our existing park land in order to create, park space. And looking at the rough size of the roadway that is now open to bicycles and pedestrians, it's a little over an acre. And looking at the cost of property in this area, an order of magnitude estimate would be over $7 million to acquire that same space. So this is really an effective and cost-effective way to create more recreational space on land that Parks already owns. Another kind of key here is in looking at the type of housing structures in Bethesda. We've got about almost 60% are one-unit structures, most likely single-family homes, which have backyards. But we've got about 40% that are 2+ unit structures. These could be apartments, these could be condos. And these, these types of houses most likely don't have backyards. And so this is another opportunity to create some park and recreational space for people to use. So I'm going to quickly cover the kind of phasing of the project itself. So the pilot project limits at the southern end, we've got Dorset, and at the northern end, we're approaching Fairfax Road, and this is Arlington Road right here. So it's just a little bit past that. So our phase 1, which was implemented in June when we suspended the Open Parkways program, this is a single lane road diet. Here's a picture of it. You can see the flex posts essentially covering the outside lane. So on each side of the roadway, we've dropped the outside lane and maintained the kind of inner lane. Phase 2, we shifted all the traffic to the east side. So now the east side is two-way traffic with one lane in each direction. And then the west side is open for bicycles and pedestrians and others to use 24/7. And this was implemented in October 2020. Here's, again, some cross sections. So where we have the grass median, we're removing the vehicle lanes, and we've got the southbound and northbound travel lane. And then at some of the intersections or where we don't have the barrier, we've added some water-filled barriers to provide a little additional protection there. Here's an overview of kind of an aerial overview of phase 2. And I'll just highlight kind of a few things that we've done with the design here. So this in blue, you can see, is our water-filled barriers, which we've added to kind of provide some protection for those walking and biking. We've moved the stop sign up to where basically the edge of the roadway is now instead of where it originally was. We've also added some pavement in areas. So this allowed us to kind of right here, you can see where my mouse is. This allowed us to add a right turn lane to just provide some additional space for those turning right onto Hillendale. Where the two lanes kind of diverge here, this is another example of where we've listened to the public feedback that we've received. So originally this was installed without flex posts, and we heard some concerns. And so we went out almost immediately and installed some flex posts here to make sure that this roadway is as clear as possible and how it functions and works as best as it can. So we're really listening to the feedback we're receiving on the traffic configurations and making changes to that to ensure that it's working. Now I'm going to pass it over to Andrew to talk about vehicular traffic counts.
Thanks, Kyle. This presentation will be posted on the project website after this meeting so that everyone has an opportunity to go over this data on their own time as well. It's a decent amount of information, and I'll be giving a summary of it. This slide gives an overview of when the 4 traffic counts were conducted in 2022, as well as the condition of the parkway at the time. It boils down to in December of 2022, phase 2 pilot project conditions were present, which is the current condition. In May of 2022, no pilot project conditions were present. And then in July and September 2022, phase 1 conditions were present, which was 1 lane in each direction separated by the grass median. And with the differences being, of course, that school was in session during September and not in July. Next slide, please. Traffic counts were conducted at 9 locations in the area, and they are Little Falls Parkway, Hillendale Road, Arlington Road, Kennedy Drive, Fairfax Road, which is closer to Bradley Boulevard, 3 locations at Dorset, which include Dorset Avenue west of Little Falls Parkway, Dorset Avenue east of Little Falls Parkway, and Dorset Avenue closer to Maryland 190 River Road. And the final location is Brookside Drive. Next slide, please. The traffic counts were conducted for 7 days over 24 hours. And for comparison purposes, we averaged them into weekday and weekend counts for comparison during pre-pilot conditions and during the pilot conditions, which were the 3 counts that were conducted during phase 1 and phase 2. For Little Falls Parkway, we found that traffic volumes have decreased during the weekdays, but increased during the weekends, with the reason being that the parkway is now open to cars during the entire weekend. Next slide, please. Hillendale Road also saw a decrease in traffic volumes in the eastbound direction during weekdays, with westbound traffic volumes remaining consistent and an increase in weekend volumes due to the operational status of the parkway on weekends. Next slide. Arlington Road is similar in that it saw a decrease in weekday traffic and an increase in weekend traffic, weekend volumes due to the operational status of the parkway. Next slide. Kennedy Drive is in the Kenwood community, and it saw a decrease in traffic volumes during weekdays and a substantial decrease in traffic volumes during the weekends as the parkway is now open, reducing cut-through traffic during the weekend significantly. Next slide, please. Fairfax Road also saw a decrease in traffic volumes with relatively consistent weekend volumes. Next slide. Dorset Avenue west of Little Falls Parkway had decreases in traffic during weekdays and weekends. Next slide. Similar situation on the east side of Little Falls Parkway, where we also saw a decrease in traffic volumes. Next slide. Brookside Drive is also in the Kenwood community, and it saw a decrease in both weekday and a substantial decrease in weekend cut-through volumes. Next slide. And finally, Dorset Avenue, closer to Maryland 190 River Road, saw a slight decrease in southbound traffic, an increase in northbound weekday traffic, as well as weekend traffic, with a slight decrease in southbound traffic. Next slide. We also performed intersection turning movement counts at the 3 intersections along Little Falls Parkway, Arlington Road, Hillendale Road, and Dorset Avenue to compare to counts we already had from 2018 and 2019. The takeaway was that the intersections are functional and operating within as expected conditions. We identified from these counts the peak hours along Little Falls Parkway, which were 7:45 to 8:45 in the morning, 4:45 to 5:45 in the afternoon. And we also found that peak hour volumes have decreased in all directions from 2018 to now 2022, from peaks of 440 vehicles per hour in the morning, northbound, 640 southbound, down to 350 and 580 respectively, and from 500 and 690 down to 450 and 560 in the afternoon. Next slide. We also conducted travel time runs. This wasn't conducted with computer modeling. It was done the old-fashioned way, a traffic engineer with a stopwatch in a car. So, anyone can replicate this. We did these travel time runs during the peak hours just described above, from Fairfax Road down all the way to River Road. And it consisted of driving up and down in both directions 5 times to get an average travel time, and then using the average travel time with a total distance traveled to determine a average travel speed, which is highlighted in the second column over here, and ranges from 16 to 18 miles per hour in the northbound and southbound directions. And from the average travel speed, we're able to use standard traffic guidance to assign a arterial level of service, which is sort of a grade, like a report card from A to F. And the grades assigned based on the highway capacity manual were B, 3 Bs and 1 C. So the average speeds of 16 to 18 miles per hour are consistent with our Vision Zero policy goals. It's the worst it gets during a typical day because these are peak hour times. And it's consistent with our expectations for dropping the speed limit to 25 miles per hour along the parkway, as well as the removal of 1 travel lane. So the grades that we're finding here are pretty good for the for sort of urban downtown Bethesda area, and we're pretty happy with the travel time runs. Next slide, please. We have collected crash data since 2015 along Little Falls Parkway between Arlington Road and Hillendale Road. The dashed line in these charts is when the safety improvements at the Capitol Crescent Trail crossing were implemented, which is the flex post road diet, as well as the race crosswalk that we previously described. The safety improvements have been extremely effective in making the road safer. Crashes have dropped down substantially, and that's total crashes between Arlington Road and Hillendale Road on that entire segment. But most compelling, crashes at the Capitol Crescent Trail crossing itself have been 0 in the last 3 years. Compare that with 6 at the crossing in 2016, which was before safety improvements were implemented. So the improvements have been extremely effective in making the CCD crossing a lot safer. Next slide, please. Phase 2 works because the traffic signals at the intersections are timed to provide slightly more green time to parkway traffic. We retained all the left turn lanes, as well as the northbound right turn lane at Hillendale Road. The adjusted configuration of the road allows for a shorter trail traffic crossing time. We met with Montgomery County Fire Rescue in January 2023 to go over the pilot project conditions, and they had no concerns about emergency response time with the 2-lane configuration. Typical 2-lane suburban roads with turn pockets can accommodate up to 20,000 cars a day. Little Falls Parkway right now sees about 11,000 cars per day, and traffic has been trending down on the road as well as in major areas, on major highways in the area since the turn of the century. Next slide, please. We have 3 charts here that outline traffic counts along Little Falls Parkway, River Road, and Wisconsin Avenue since 2001 and 2003 for River Road and Wisconsin Avenue, and since 2016 along Little Falls Parkway. You can see that traffic has dropped about 35% since 2016 on Little Falls Parkway. It has dropped about 20% on River Road, and this is River Road closer to the DC border. So it's between Little Falls Parkway and the boundary of the District of Columbia. And it's down about 20% along Wisconsin Avenue, and the Wisconsin Avenue location is close to Bradley Boulevard. So it's very close to the downtown center of Bethesda. And since then, the Bethesda Chevy Chase area has seen a growth in population of about 15 to 20%. So the growth in urbanized areas has not translated to an increase in vehicle traffic. Next slide, please. We can also compare Little Falls Parkway traffic with traffic counts that we have on our other parkways, including Sligo Creek Parkway, which is near Silver Spring and Tacoma Park, and with Beach Drive, which is in the Kensington area. Both Sligo Creek Parkway and Beach Drive are 2-lane park roads with a 25-mile-per-hour speed limit. And both roads process a similar amount of traffic every day as Little Falls Parkway. Next slide, please. So to summarize, Little Falls Parkway and adjacent roads has seen similar traffic volumes under the pilot project conditions as pre-pilot project conditions. The current 2-lane configuration has eliminated cut-through traffic in Kenwood, as it has maintained at least 2 drive lanes along the parkway at all times. The peak hour travel times with the current configuration are more than reasonable and consistent with our safety Vision Zero goals of 25 miles per hour, as we touched on, is ideal from a safety perspective, as well as delivering other potential benefits, which Kyle will describe, including repurposed park space, which can be used for a linear park or other uses. It reduces impervious area to provide benefits to Willett Branch and reduce parks maintenance and operational costs. Next slide, please. There's always opportunities for potential improvement, and we believe we've identified a few that we can implement, including adding a dedicated right turn lane at northbound Little Falls Parkway and Arlington Road, extending the right turn lane that's already in place at Little Falls Parkway and Hillendale Road, and further assessment of the existing traffic signals at Dorset, Hillendale, and Arlington to potentially add more green time for Little Falls Parkway. Next slide. This plan gives an overview of some of those improvements, including a new right turn lane at Arlington Road and Little Falls Parkway, extension of the existing right turn lane at Hillendale Road and Little Falls Parkway, and we can also assess the traffic signal timing at the 3 intersections along this segment as well. Next slide.
All right, and I'm picking back up, and apologies, the lights in the building on my side have gone off, so I'm sitting in the dark here, but bear with me. So we're going to talk a little bit about the potential for a pilot park and some of the concepts we've developed thus far. So this is showing a kind of a cross section of what we're looking at. So on one side, we'll have northbound and southbound traffic, and on the other side, we'll have room for open space as well as kind of a buffered shared use path area running through. So right here, this is kind of a end-to-end overview showing the full limits of the pilot park. And zooming in a little bit here, we're showing a few examples. So moving left to right, showing a few examples of the types of amenities that we envision could be activated for this pilot project, or pilot park. So we've got some room for food trucks as well as some seating. We've got some games such as cornhole, some space for mazes or chess and checkers, some ping pong tables, variety of seating, some nature play areas, some skate park features. And one of the other big things that I think would work really well here is this little area is showing a kind of traffic skills garden, an area where you can learn to ride your bike. We've heard from a lot of people that the Capitol Crescent Trail is already here. Why would you need additional recreational space? And if anybody's been out on the Capitol Crescent Trail, especially on the weekends, you would know that it's extremely busy and some cyclists are moving pretty fast on there. So I think, for me personally, I wouldn't take my daughter out there and teach her how to ride a bike on the Capitol Crescent Trail. But if I had some additional open space, recreational space, that might be a little bit more better suited for doing things like that. Here are a few pictures from throughout the county and some of the previous parks activation projects we've done. So, things like music, cornhole, ping pong, bocce, things like that. One thing we've heard from some people is, this potential pilot park is right next to a road. Who's going to want to use that? And the Parks Department maintains playground, exercise equipment, tennis courts, picnic areas, variety of recreational amenities immediately adjacent to Sligo Creek and Beach Drive. There's a couple pictures on the left side of the screen here. And moving forward, if we are to implement this pilot park, we can make some additional safety improvements, such as fencing in the median or pavement removal at the intersection. Another question we've heard a few times is, where are people going to park to visit this? And so, the first thing that's worth noting is the Capitol Crescent Trail is an extremely busy trail. It's a major connector for the communities in this area. And so we think a lot of people will be able to walk and bike to this pilot park. But we also have parking at the Bethesda pool, as well as just north of there. So we have some existing parking already in place. And if this becomes more than a pilot, then that's something that we can look at. As far as the process, we are presenting the results of the traffic study right now. We will be going to the planning board to get their approval to maintain the current configuration. And if that approval is received, then we will work to activate the pilot park. Once that's activated, we'll be going back to the public and initiating a process for looking at what a permanent park in that space might look like before moving on into design. So I'm now going to pass it over to Darren to talk about a couple other of the kind of common concerns that we've heard throughout the process. And go ahead, Darren.
Thanks, Kyle. Go ahead, next slide. So as Kyle mentioned, we've been listening to folks throughout this process and anticipate a few questions and comments that we're going to get. So I wanted to kind of tackle them before we move on to the Q&A question. Go ahead, next slide, Kyle. The first question, I see it coming up in the Q&A a little bit already, is kind of who's asking for this additional recreational space? Don't we have enough park space already? And I'll just say that's been a really surprising comment for me as a park professional, because we hear every day, certainly every week, the need for more parks, not only throughout the county, but specifically in the Bethesda area, more opportunities to get outside and recreate. And it's part of the reason why the open parkway was popular. So generally we hear that. And then of course, we got a lot of pushback when we suspended the open parkway. So generally speaking, yes, we do hear a lot of requests for additional park space on surveys and regularly from residents. A lot of questions about the interim design. And I'll just say that in the event that the planning board gives us the green light to move forward with the permanent park, that would provide the opportunity for us to address some of the things that Andrew just mentioned, including turning movements, the crossing design, signal timing, and some people do not enjoy the aesthetic of flex posts, and we'd be able to replace those flex posts with something more permanent. Some questions about decision-making authority and coordination. So just want to speak to that quickly. Montgomery Parks and the planning board have authority over Little Falls Parkway. That said, we are coordinating with the National Capital Planning Commission and CPC in relation to Capper-Crampton requirements. And any permanent park project that we undertake with the sign off of the planning board will go through NCPC's review process. And we've been in coordination with them and look forward to working with them in the event that we move this project forward. And lastly, I'll just mention, we've been working closely with the Montgomery County Department of Transportation. They've reviewed all of our plans, traffic data, and modeling, and they conducted the signal timing work. So we've been closely coordinating with all relevant parties. There's questions about the Capitol Crescent Trail crossing. As mentioned, before we did this most recent pilot, there was two lanes to cross at the trail. Given the data that Andrew shared, that's been really effective to improving safety. The Parks Department would, at this point, is not considering returning back to 4 lanes at that crossing because that's not consistent with our Vision Zero goals and unsafe. We've got a lot of questions about why not build a bridge. So at this point, we view that as prohibitively expensive. It would be something in the neighborhood of $10 to $20 million and would compete with other priorities such as renovating the Capitol Crescent Trail. So hopefully we'll get a lot of questions today, detailed questions that we can answer about the traffic counts. We have traffic engineers on the call who can answer those questions in detail. But I just wanted to state that the counts were done according to standard best practices, and that we counted use of the open parkways consistently as well. So really quick, a couple of next steps. So this will not be your last time to weigh in on this project. As I mentioned at the top, we are going to go to the planning board. There'll be a public hearing tentatively scheduled for March 23rd. And then we hope to go back to the planning board the next week and get a decision on whether or not to move forward with this project. Those dates are both tentative based on the planning board schedule. So for more information and to find this presentation and recording after this evening, give us a little time to get it up there, but we'll get it up there. You can go to the project website, which is www.mocoparks.org/Little Falls Parkway. And you can, if we don't get to your questions or comments today, and even if we do, you can email us at lfp@montgomeryparks.org. So now we're going to move on to questions and comments. And wow, our timing was just about spot on. So about 43 minutes. Thanks to Kyle and Andrew for that presentation. We're going to try to address as many questions as we can, and we're going to do it in two ways. Some people like to be unmuted and speak, and some people want to put their questions in written form and sort of think better that way. So we're going to try to do both. I'm going to start with a couple of questions from the chat box, and then we'll go to the live answer. So a couple of housekeeping on that. When I give the signal, Melissa will allow people to raise their hand. And at that point, when folks raise their hand, that's going to be the order that we're going to call on people. We're going to call on people that put their name, that identify themselves by name. Accurate names, not anonymous. And when you do speak, please try to keep it as brief as possible. The reason for that is we want to hear from as many of you as we can. And so between the question box and the spoken comments, it's going to be. Please try to make your comments brief. We do have 126 people. No, excuse me, 196 people on the call and 126 questions already. So we're apologize in advance. We're not going to get to everybody, but without further ado, let's go ahead. So Melissa, go ahead and let people raise their hands. And so we'll get a queue for spoken questions. And again, we'll get through as many as we can. The way that's going to work is I'm going to call on somebody and then Melissa will allow them to unmute themselves. You'll still have to hit mute. But while people are doing that, I'm going to go ahead and start with some questions we got from the Q&A box. So the first question that I have in front of me, and I have colleagues kind of sorting and organizing for me. So what I have is, does the proposal to move forward with Little Falls Parkway revamp eliminate funding for the upgrading of the Willett branch and creating a park along it, something that has been on the books since at least 1982? So really good question. No, this doesn't displace funding for that. We are in the process of land acquisition for the Willett Branch Greenway, and that is underway and still an active project. This does not displace that. So good question. We've also had several other questions about how this Little Falls Parkway project, or how Little Falls Parkway will be affected by Westbard development, including whether there'll be additional traffic and how the park will interact with the Westbard redevelopment and whether or not that will have any additional traffic impact. So Andrew Tsai, could I direct that question to you?
Yeah, sure. As we mentioned in the presentation, we're finding that over time, the traffic volumes along Little Falls Parkway, as well as all the major state highways in the immediate area, have decreased, even though population has increased. Now, it's hard to predict the exact effects of future development on the parkway, but we believe that with the current average volumes that we're experiencing, there is a lot of extra capacity in there with the 2-lane configuration for additional traffic, either from West Bard or other development in the area in the future.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to do one more question from the Q&A box, which is, please address, and Lieutenant Michalauskas, I'm going to kick this to you from Park Police. Please address the issue of trucks and commercial vehicles using the parkway. Can you speak, Lieutenant, to what our policy is on that and what you've seen related to that?
Sure, yes. And just a reminder, the definition for our parkways of commercial vehicle is a gross vehicle weight of 10,600 pounds or more. And we do acknowledge there has been a significant increase in commercial vehicles using the parkway. A lot of that has to do with the construction in the area. Our officers are down there frequently doing traffic control device control, which is the traffic signs, the no left turns, stop signs, red lights, things like that, and also commercial vehicle enforcement where applicable. If there's ever a time when there are commercial vehicles that people can see a pattern for, they're always welcome to call our non-emergency number, and we can have officers come out if there's a pattern or a specific time that they're there, we can come and enforce that.
Thank you, Lieutenant. So now we're going to go to the phones, as it were. I'm looking at the order of the hands. Melissa, can you unmute or allow Mike Johnson to unmute himself and go ahead and ask a question or make a comment?
Thank you. Yeah, nice presentation. And by and large, I'm in favor of this. But I do think you do yourself no service by not mentioning at all the negative feedback that I know you've had. You constantly talk about the positive feedback. You haven't mentioned any of the negative feedback in your narrative. Second point is, I think it's a little disingenuous to talk about flows of traffic during a pandemic period where we all know that the traffic flows are a little different. But my primary question was, what is being done about traffic calming for cyclists? Because cyclists use the Capitol Crescent Trail and many other places at a totally ridiculous speed. And you're all about calming traffic or whatever, but I think the use and abuse of our roadways by cyclists needs to be addressed. Thanks.
Great, yeah, appreciate that. And thank you for getting a lot in there, but being pretty concise. I will speak to part of it and then I'll hand it over to Andrew for us. I will absolutely acknowledge we've gotten a wide range of feedback on this project, including questions and criticism. So I certainly will acknowledge that. And there was a question about trail calming. Andrew, do you want to take a shot at that?
We previously implemented some trail calming along the Capitol Crescent Trail, crossing in Little Falls Parkway with the dog leg. The intention was to slow cyclists that are approaching the intersection.
Thank you, Andrew. Oh.
Can I also talk a little bit about the traffic data that was gathered? So the 4 counts were most recently conducted in 2022. And we also have counts that were conducted pre-pandemic. And even the pre-pandemic counts showed a decline in volumes year over year. So it's not necessarily just the trend that's been that we're seeing just during or after the pandemic. This is something that's been happening for years. It's just an overall decrease in volumes on some roads in the area.
Thanks, Andrew. Let's go to the call again. Let's go to Melissa. Can you unmute Carly too?
Hi, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. Congratulations on eliminating collisions at Little Falls Parkway and the trail in the last few years. I think that's a huge win. I'm really in favor of the program that you're putting together. I have a question more so on how to connect the open parkway spaces all the way back to Massachusetts Avenue again. I think there's a great opportunity to create a protected connection all the way back to Little Falls Stream Valley Park and the trail system that is there. And I'd love to know more about why the decision to cut it off at Dorset Avenue was made, and whether or not signage has been considered on the trail to let people know about the additional space, since the trail in a good way has kind of overgrown its capacity.
Thank you for those questions. And I'm going to do my best to address them and remember them, frankly. So the first one was about why not, or could we extend the open space on the 2 lanes down to River, and we because that had been the length of the open parkway. That has to do with some logistical challenges, specifically access to the school there, and our sort of confidence that we would be able to maintain the flow of traffic north of Dorset. We're very interested in the event that this is successful, looking into future phases that may extend down, but we're sort of taking it one step at a time right now, because of the complexity of the project. So that's the answer to that. And then somebody remind me what the part 2 of that question was, because I don't want to forget. Signage. Could we sort of, I guess, notify folks or promote the 2 lanes, the kind of the parkway availability on the trail? I think that's a really good idea. That's a really good idea. Thank you. I may not have gotten to a third part of that, and I apologize. Let's go back to the Q&A box. So somebody writes, parkways were built for what was known as pleasure driving, which is driving for recreation rather than for the purpose of reaching a destination. Do you have any data on how much of the current traffic on Little Falls Parkway is pleasure driving and how much is to reach a destination? I don't, but I will throw that to Andrew in case you have any data on that.
That's a good question, and I'd like to invite Brian White, the traffic engineer with Mead and Hunt, to see if we have any insight on that.
We don't have any travel surveys on the type of user for Little Falls Parkway.
Okay, I'm gonna do one more from the Q&A box, and this came in at 7:17, so it's probably answered, but I will throw it out there anyway. Have you done any traffic counts on Kenwood and also on Goldsboro Road, which are 2 alternatives that drivers take? Andrew?
We have conducted counts in the Kenwood community, not on Goldsboro Road, but along 2 roads in the Kenwood residential community. Brookside as well as Kennedy. So Brookside is closer to River Road and Kennedy is a little bit closer to Bradley Boulevard. In 2017, we also conducted some cut-through studies with vehicle cameras in the Kenwood area as well, but nothing that was specifically on Goldsboro Road. And the counts for the 2 locations in the Kenwood community did show a decrease in both weekday traffic as well as a substantial decrease in weekend traffic.
Andrew. We'll go back to the phone. Melissa, can you allow Richard Hoyle to unmute?
Hi, hi, thanks. I have to congratulate you on this excellent analysis and very thorough job. I'm a retired firefighter. I was assigned to the Glen Echo Station at the last 8 years of my career, serving rescues on the Capitol Crescent Trail and Little Falls Parkway and River and Mass. The over-design of Little Falls Parkway has always puzzled me, and it is a real safety hazard. So going to 2 lanes, I see as a great benefit here. And you've shown to me that this is a that the impacts to surrounding communities are limited or extremely limited. So I believe it's a win-win. I'd like to see more forestation of the Little Falls Parkway corridor as a result of this work. That would be great. And the crossing of Little Falls of the Capitol Crescent Trail, Little Falls Parkway, just really needs to be kept at grade. I have attended to head trauma crashes where bicyclists have lost control going down the steep ramp on the bridge over River Road. This bridges that cause a change in elevation for the cyclists and walkers is really a poor infrastructure solution.
Thank you, Richard. I apologize, but I'm gonna cut you off so we can get to some.
All right.
Okay. Sorry, I was gonna give you a second to wrap up. I sorry for interrupting. But thank you for your comment. And I don't know if Andrew, or Kyle, you want to respond to anything there. Otherwise, we'll move on to other.
Now let's keep going, I think.
Okay. So going back to the Q&A box, did you consider using the center median for cyclists so no lanes needed to be closed and both drivers and cyclists can utilize Little Falls Parkway? Andrew or Kyle, Andrew, you want to speak to that?
I can speak to that a little bit.
Sure.
I don't think that is something we would consider, being sandwiched in between, two different directions of moving traffic, especially at the intersections, would be a pretty uncomfortable situation and would expose cyclists to a lot of conflict. So I don't think that's something we have considered or would consider.
Okay, thank you. Let's go back to the phones. Melissa, could you unmute Leanne Tobias, please?
Hi there. I appreciate you taking my question. I would have to say I am not at all persuaded yet about the traffic analysis expectations. Number one, federal workers will be returning to their offices in May. That would increase potential traffic. In addition to Westbard, which adds about 650,000 square feet of residential and retail real estate, there is the downtown Bethesda sector plan being implemented, which is going to result in millions of square feet of additional commercial and residential construction. So because of the fact that Little Falls Parkway connects the Westport area and Bethesda, I am concerned about the adequacy of your traffic studies. And I do want to know if there's any potential for doing some sort of going forward estimate as opposed to the mere statement in general traffic volumes have decreased.
Thanks, Andrew. You want to start with that and then kick it to Brian?
Yeah, sure. A lot of great points in that. The counts that we have along Little Falls Parkway, River Road, and Wisconsin have been done for years. Wisconsin and River since almost the turn of the century. And we're seeing a long-term decrease in traffic pre-pandemic as well. So if federal workers go back to the office, we're not expecting that to result in a drastic change in the volumes. I'd like to invite Brian to speak about future modeling, future growth, potentially implementation. That's certainly something that we can do as well.
Thanks, Andrew. So let's leave this slide up. When we originally did the traffic model, we actually used 2016 traffic counts to be conservative, not expecting the continued decrease that we're seeing. So we are pretty confident that future growth has been taken into account. as Andrew was saying, if this road, this pilot program continues or it gets accepted by the planning board, we'll be adding that right turn lane onto Arlington, heading into downtown Bethesda, which would add capacity to the overall network.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, I'm going to go back to the Q&A box. Somebody just wrote, I don't trust traffic studies because in my experience, the heavier volumes of traffic begin well after 5 p.m. How is the 4:45 to 5:45 p.m. hour determined as the best hour to make traffic studies? Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, good question. So we actually collect data in 15-minute intervals throughout the day, and that this block of 4:45 to 5:45 was the largest chunk of volume over the course of an hour. And hourly data is typically what is used to create models, both by traffic engineers like myself and DOT as well.
So in other words, that was the demonstration, the actual hour that had the most traffic.
Yes, correct. So these were the 4:45 to 5:45 is the highest consecutive 4 times 15 minutes intervals. So,
Okay,
And just to reiterate there, so for the entire 7-day period, we collected 24 hours at a time in 15-minute increments. And using that data, we were able to pinpoint when the peak hour was based on the counts that we collected, right?
right, and I mean just to really get into the weeds here, we only use Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday data. So we don't use data collected on Monday. We don't use data collected on Friday, because when people do telecommute, they tend to pick Mondays and Fridays. So it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and this is consistently the peak travel times.
thank you. Okay, let's go back to the phones. Melissa, I think you can spare me pronouncing names, because I think we're seeing the same list. You can go ahead and unmute the next person. And that's Robert, so go ahead, Robert.
Yes, hi, it's Robert McGarrah. I appreciate you're doing this hearing. I'm on the Parkway. I drive on it every single day of the week. I walk on it with at least 10 friends every morning at 7 o'clock in the morning. And you were doing just fine until you eliminated the entire western part of the lanes at the pool going all the way down to Dorset Avenue. That's a development that no one asked for, no one needed to have. And all the data that you're citing has nothing to do with that period of time since November. Moreover, driving on it, I've actually had to take emergency action to avoid a head-on collision from people who mistakenly go in the wrong lane on those 2 lanes. What you've done in addition is cite the High Line as a model for what you're trying to do. The High Line in New York City, as you probably know, is an elevated freight line that was transformed into a public park, and it's maintained by the Friends of the High Line, which is a nonprofit community organization. I really think the Parks Department should save the money, go back to the configuration that allowed people to pass down both sides with 2 lanes of traffic. You've done a good job with the safety crossing at the pool. We cross it every single day. And you need to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Thank you for the comment. I think generally that comment speaks for itself, but there was a comment about when we did the counts, and I want to give Andrew and Brian a chance to address that piece.
Yeah, so one count was conducted in December of 2022, which was when the phase 2 condition was had been active for several weeks. And we also have the intersection turning movements were conducted in January of 2023, as well as the speed tests. So several of the data points were collected after the phase 2 condition had been in place for several weeks already.
And I'll just add a comment on the bicycle and pedestrian count. So we have trail counters out there that we've used to collect, counts for bicyclists and pedestrians on the open parkways. And one of the things that we've noticed, we've also got trail counters on the Capitol Crescent Trail in a few different locations. And when you stack the data from the Capitol Crescent along with the open parkways data, it tends to peak and decline at the exact same day. So we're pretty confident in the data that we've collected, counting bicyclists and pedestrians. And so I just wanted to, I've seen that in the Q&A box a little bit. So I just wanted to provide some context to the bicycle and pedestrian data there.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm also introducing questions from the Q&A box. So one of them was, if speed and auto safety is, or let's say if speed and safety is really the primary concern, why aren't there cameras or other speed enforcement measures? And I think Lieutenant McAleskis, touched on that a little bit, and I'll just state that as Kyle mentioned in the presentation, we have a sort of a holistic set of concerns, including safety, safe operation of the road, public recreation, and reducing traffic. So, Lieutenant McAleskis, I don't know if you want to say anything about other speed control methods.
Hi, sure. For the speed control, we do enforcement down there for speed. As far as cameras go, that would take coordination with Montgomery County government. And I'd have to look into it further to see what the parameters are that would make that area qualify for speed cameras with the county's program as it exists today. But right now, we also can deploy variable message signboards down there that can flash the speeds of cars to remind drivers of the speed limit. And that does help. We've used it on Beach Drive and Sligo Creek Parkway, and that does help control the speed of drivers.
I appreciate that. Kyle, we have a question about the counts. I don't know if maybe on the slide we had 2.5 thousand people per day at Bethesda Pool. Someone says, what does that mean? Are you trying to tell us that 2.5 thousand people per day were actually walking along Little Falls Parkway? And we've gotten several other questions generally about how the counters work.
Yeah, so going back to the slide on the user counts right near Bethesda Pool. So these counts are showing just the days that the open parkway itself was actually open. So we're only counting, Saturdays and Sundays from, 9 a.m. till 4 or 6 p.m. on the weekends. And essentially what we have is a trail counter that has an infrared beam that every time that beam is broken, it counts as a user passing. So if you were to walk past it, the beam kind of breaks, that counts as one user. And so, so looking at when we first implemented the Open Parkways program and we first installed the counters, you can see this data point right here was one single day where we counted just over 2,500. It's maybe a little easier to see when we're just looking at the 2022 data up till where the Open Parkways program was suspended. But, I think I looked up what this day in May was. This was a day with like ½ inch or quarter inch of rain and 40-mile-an-hour winds. So not super surprising that nobody's out there. But on, sunnier days, nice days, we're seeing, 6, 7, 8, 900 people counting here. And one point of clarification for both the bike ped user counts as well as vehicular user counts. These are not unique individual counts. So if you were to drive your car, let's say on Little Falls into Bethesda and then drive back, you would be counted as a trip into Bethesda and a trip back from Bethesda. And the same goes for these. So these are our user counts. These are the, as basically as you could state it, this is the number of times somebody has walked past the counter.
Thank you, Kyle. I'll do one more from the Q&A box and then I'll go back to the phones. The question is, why can't the Capitol Crescent Trail or nearby parks be expanded to serve more bike lanes as well as park type areas and provide these proposed amenities? So I think the question is, can't this be addressed by other parks or the Capitol Crescent Trail? So Kyle, why don't you want to speak to that?
Yeah, could you just repeat that one more time? I was reading something from the Q&A here.
Why can't the Capitol Crescent Trail be expanded to serve bikes?
Yeah, so, we've got a facility plan coming up in the next fiscal year, looking at the Capitol Crescent Trail. So we will be looking at, potential areas where we can do some widening of the trail itself. So that's something that we will be looking at, separately from this particular project.
Thanks, Kyle. Let's go back to the phones. Melissa, could you unmute Bob Klopak?
Thank you. We appreciate the commitment to safety and also share the desire for green space. It's part of the reason we moved into this area in the first place. I too have some doubts about the traffic counts given federal workers going back and the enormous growth in this area. But my question is, this area has Norwood Park, it has Kenwood Park, it has the Capitol Crescent Trail and other trails. Why is more park a priority over trying to deal with long-term traffic flow and congestion given the growth in this area?
Really appreciate that question. Yeah, so we're trying to balance a variety of demands, and depending on who you talk to, you hear different priorities, right? And so certainly some folks are really focused on traffic flow, and some folks are really focused on recreation and outdoor space. So what we're trying to do is strike what we think is a balance where, based on our traffic analysis on how much traffic a 2-lane road could carry and how much Little Falls Parkway historically has carried, we believe that it could function with 2 lanes, and that provided an opportunity to address some of the recreational needs. You mentioned Norwood Park. Someone else in the comments described Norwood as underutilized. So when we recently tried to do a project and put an amenity, a dog park in Norwood, we heard a lot of feedback that was a really highly used park and that space was really, really valuable. So, there's some sense that some public space is underused and some other people might have a really different take on that. So I think in general, though, we do consistently hear that open space, green space, and park space is at a premium and really valuable. So, and I think you will hear that from folks, but we recognize that, people use the road as well, and it needs to carry traffic, and that's why we've done the test to see if it can or not. So let's do, let's go to the phone again. Melissa, could you unmute Rebecca? Thank you.
Hi, am I unmuted?
You're good.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm Rebecca Hansen. I'm co-president of the Westmoreland Citizens Association. We're probably one of the largest associations in the area with almost 900 homes. And at our November 22 fall member meeting, we had 2 people from Parks come and present the plans for the Little Falls Parkway closure. And they mentioned an April pilot, a pilot program in April where they would stock the area with games and the food trucks and all the amenities that you've described. And then after those amenities were available for people to try out for 30 days, they would get our feedback and then proceed to the planning board. However, now, you said earlier that you have this March 23rd meeting with the planning board and the hearing. So is this April pilot no longer in the plan?
That is an outstanding question. Thank you so much. And it was myself and Kyle who were the 2 park staff. So nice to talk to you again. Yeah, really good question. And I probably should have clarified that because we had been talking about that April pilot. So what we decided to do because of, and somebody said I should acknowledge more of the criticism, right? So because of the feedback that we have heard and some of the questions, we decided that instead of investing kind of the energy on the pilot program, now we would get a ruling from the planning board, kind of a yes or no on whether or not to proceed before doing that, just to kind of, have the full public process, have a chance for us to have this conversation and the public to communicate with the planning board. And then just find out what's the appetite of the planning board, where do we stand on this project, should we move forward with it? And so, yes, in the event that we get the green light from the planning board to move forward with the project, we would still very much like to do the pilot program. I will tell you, it will require a lot of ramp up really fast, and Kyle will be very busy trying to deploy and arrange for that pilot condition. But we still, in the event that we move forward with the project, based on the question that we're going to ask the planning board is, do you agree that the road is functioning with 2 lanes such that it makes sense to even think about a park here? That's really the question we're posing the planning board, and based on their answer to that question, we will move forward with the test park, kind of the pilot park, and then and then proceed with a permanent park. That's the decision of the planning board. So, really great question. It would delay the pilot park is the answer. This process of going to the planning board first is going to delay that. So I hope that answers your question. We've got a question from the Q&A box that I think is a combination of questions. So I'm going to read it all. What is the budget for the future plans for games, bikes, food trucks, and pedestrians? Why is the Parks Department spending this amount, whatever the amount is, to create parkland when there are parks already in the vicinity? Aren't there other communities who need the parkland more? Did anyone provide a cost-benefit analysis of the pilot or the project? And several questions are asking about the budget for this project and what projects it might displace. Okay, so great question. And I think, Kyle, do you have some of the numbers that you can speak to, or Andrew? I can't remember. I know somebody had prepared for this question. Kyle, I cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. I don't think I have those numbers handy, but I will look for them right now.
Okay.
This is Andy Frank. Question of what was the cost of the pilot program on Little Falls Parkway?
Yes.
So the phase 1 cost was approximately $40,000, and the phase 2 cost was approximately $90,000.
Thanks, Andy. And then there would be, additional costs to deploy the games and the pilot games. And I'll just say, really cost effective. The kinds of things that we did during the pandemic. We already own some ping pong tables that we can deploy. The seating, it won't be zero cost, but compared to building a park.
Correct. It would be very much in the tens of thousands of dollars, not in the hundreds of thousands of dollars at all, which is very reasonable compared to the other costs or cost of making permanent amenities within a park.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, let's go back to the phones. Melissa, could you unmute Lynn Romberg?
Okay. I wanted to know, you've had a lot of things on, I also live in the WCA community, on percentages of homes, like how many people signed a petition, but you don't give account ever of how many people could have signed those petitions. So hence, what does that number mean? And the other thing I have seen on your Parkway now that bike lanes just end or disappear, which I find really rather dangerous. And now your introduction of, let's say, ping pong tables where people are biking or learning to bike makes it even more dangerous. Might be nice to have the recreation capability, but I really find that having all of this, the games activity, can be distracting to bikers and can be definitely distracting to drivers on the other side of safety. And that is one of my big concerns. I've also loved to see one of these in action, but I don't know that one can. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the comment. One of the advantages of doing a pilot is we get to test things out and see. So, I think the way that sort of block of Little Falls Parkway is configured, we would plan to concentrate some of the activities more close towards the crossing, providing at least a 10-foot pathway through, and then open up the area south of that so folks could learn to ride and do rollerblade, which is a challenging thing to do on the Capitol Crescent Trail, right? And so I think your point about would there potentially be user conflicts in the pilot park is well taken, and something that we'll certainly consider in the design. In terms of distracting drivers, I think that's something that we would have to see. I don't anticipate that being a challenge, but again, that's the beauty of being able to test some of these things. And I can't remember if there was another piece. Kai, you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. We had the slide. I think it's right here, but Beach Drive, Sligo Creek. Many of our park roads do have amenities very immediately adjacent to the roadway, and so drivers should be focused on the road and what's in front of them. They should not be focused on things off of the road, and combined with the reduced speeds that we're seeing, this makes the roadway safer, even with having these amenities adjacent to it. And then I'll just highlight, Darren referenced that once we kind of get past some of the amenities that we're planning, then we kind of open up this area to kind of have a little more open space. But otherwise, through the kind of linear park concept, we are trying to have a clear delineation of where those cycling should stay, much like we would on a path or elsewhere.
Thanks, Carl. So going back to the Q&A box, somebody writes, what will be discussed on March 23rd and decided on March 30th by the planning board? Whether to begin the pilot park test to see whether there should be such a linear park, or finalize current road configuration and the park plan so that the only thing to discuss in the future are the details of the park. Okay, great question. So what we're doing is we're taking the kind of the up and down question of, does the planning board agree that the 2 lanes works, that the Parks Department should continue planning for the park? And that's when we would deploy the pilot park and start planning for a future capital project. So that's the question we're asking. Does the roadway function, and should the project proceed? Not anything about the specific nature of the linear park and what that might look like. And in fact, once we got the green light, we would need to do an engagement process to figure out the optimum use of the 2 lanes moving in. So thank you for the clarifying question. Let's go back to the phones. Melissa, I think you did it. Go ahead, Michael Steiner.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. It was mentioned sort of tangentially that there were some improvements planned for the Willits Branch Trail. Could you just speak for a moment about what improvements are planned for that and when that's likely to happen?
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm going to ask one of my colleagues if they could track down from our website or Google the Willett Branch master plan, because I think that that's going to answer that question in much greater detail than I could on the fly right now. And that's a pretty exciting vision for a greenway park and some really good stream kind of daylighting and restoration of the Willett Branch. So I'm hoping we can answer that question comprehensively with a link. So please check out the chat box for that. And if that doesn't happen, please follow up with us and we can get you the answer to that.
I just want to say we're in a land acquisition phase of that work, which can be a long phase, obviously. for the Willett, developing the Willett Branch Greenway. And there are, pending other developments as well. So it's a long-term vision.
Thanks, Andy. Okay, looks like we've got a question. Oh yeah, a question about, I'll just read it. I'm concerned about the barrier between traffic and the linear park is quite flimsy. So flex posts don't provide sufficient protection for recreational users from vehicular traffic. Didn't see data on recreational users since phase 2. Is there any data to show that linear parks along busy parkways actually attract users? So, okay, so a couple of things. Question about flex posts. That is something that we could address in the event that we make a permanent park here. We could replace the flex posts with other permanent materials. We could also do some fencing and other barriers in the median, because right now it's median separated by a grassy median, and there's other things that we could do to really, really make sure that cars aren't crossing the grassy median there. And so that's a great question. Users since phase 2, we have to manually collect the data on that, and so I haven't seen data recently on phase 2. And then is there any data to show that linear parks along busy roads actually attract users? And that's what Kyle was speaking to when he was showing the other kind of facilities in our parkways that are adjacent to roads. And those are, we have not heard, significant safety or experiential complaints about those things. So I think that's our best answer to that at the moment. Okay, we'll go back to the phones. Trisha Johnson, looks like you are unmuted. Oh, you have to unmute yourself though.
Yep. Thank you. Am I unmuted?
You're good.
Am I good still?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, we hear you.
When I asked Sean Emerson this and he didn't have an answer. When you have food trucks, first of all, are you going to have porta potties? Are you going to have trash receptacles? And when you have events, are you going to close the parkway? And also, I'll keep going. When you had the Bethesda Implementation Advisory Committee talked about a 2,000 square foot park, which is sort of about your size park. What about the hardscape? The number they came up with was $10 million for the Bethesda Advisory Committee. How much is this going to cost when you redo the hardscape, you put in greens, you put in all that stuff, not just in a pilot, but in the permanent? And when you have events, are you closing that parkway?
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. So I think it was a two-part question. One, we're gonna close the parkway when we have events. We're gonna provide porta potties, and a question about the cost. Make sure I.
Yeah, and I can
Go ahead, Kyle.
On that, Darren.
Yep.
So the way we've designed the water-fill barriers and flex posts at the access points, we have the ability to access that for the food trucks. So we have a way to get food trucks as well as parks maintenance staff in and out of the closed section of Little Falls Parkway. And we are not looking at closing down the entire section of Little Falls, the traffic side for events. As far as trash cans and porta potties, we currently have and maintain some porta potties in the Bethesda pool parking lot, and would be looking to increase the number of porta potties we have there as part of this. As far as trash cans and operations and maintenance, we've reviewed these pilot concept plans with our kind of operations and maintenance staff, and have plans in place for addressing that if we move forward with the pilot park concept.
Thanks, Kyle. Did you cover everything? I was distracted.
I covered what I jotted down. Pat was
okay. I think the last question was cost, and she was correct that developing parks in Bethesda it's expensive. And that's kind of one of the things that we see as an advantage of this project. I think we can do this permanent park even more cost effectively than some of our other projects, in part because we already own the land and the nature of the park. But a lot of that will be determined in the design, and which is a public process that folks can certainly participate. All right, so my colleagues are grouping questions, which I really appreciate. So there was one about several questions asking, why do this now? Why not wait for more traffic data? So Andrew or Brian, could you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. We've been collecting data throughout 2022, as well as since 2016, 2017, through the 2019 facility plan for the improvements at the Capitol Crescent Trail crossing. And we're confident, the engineering team, we're confident that we have all the data we need to draw a conclusion that the 2-lane configuration is safe and effective.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, we can go back to the phones. Reed, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you. I think 2 lanes makes a lot of sense for Little Falls Parkway, but the configuration of this latest pilot is astonishing to me. Why the road weaves over from side to side. Why don't you just have a single lane on both sides of the median on the inside and leave the outer lane open for recreation? Right now, if you're recreating on the, I would think of it as the west side, but maybe it's the south side, going down toward Dorset, then you all of a sudden you're confronted by the traffic coming over to you.
Yeah, thank you.
Why would we do that?
All right, okay, yeah, great question. So when we initially tested whether or not the roadway could manage the traffic volumes, the first thing we did, and Kyle is pulling up the image, first thing we did was what you suggested, which is closing the outer lanes. Unfortunately, that didn't allow for safe pedestrian access throughout, right? So we weren't able to design that. People used it, but it wasn't designed for, you can actually see a sign, it's like a speed sign or something else right in the middle of the lane, because it wasn't designed for use, because we couldn't make the connectivity happen safely. It is something as part of a bigger capital project, we could potentially look into that. Of course, what that would do is it would limit it would do 2 things. One, it would put the users, the park users, the pedestrians and bicyclists closer to the moving traffic, and it would split up the public space. So it would sort of mean that we couldn't have more of a park experience. It would be 2 sort of linear travelways, which, is not necessarily without value, but it's a little bit of a different vision. So that's sort of, I think, our thought process there.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, in this photo, you can see the flex posts are right on the kind of dashed white line. And if we were to look at, using this space as kind of the recreational space, we would definitely want to add in a buffer there, probably 4 feet or maybe even more. And so if we're doing that, then we're going to shrink that available space even more. So what we'd really prefer to do is to use the grass median that's currently there to provide that buffer space, to keep kind of the different modes of use separated and to provide some of that cushion.
Okay, thanks, Kyle. Going back to the Q&A box, the question is, have you studied the speed impact on cut-through traffic? I can attest to a significant speed increase for non-residents cutting through Kenwood on Kennedy. Yes, I think this is an opportunity to talk about cut-through traffic and the impacts we've seen from the pilot. Go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2017, 2018, when we did the cut-through study in Kenwood using cameras, we were able to identify the average travel speeds of the cars traveling through there. And I'll defer to Brian as to what that speed was. Off the top of my head, I believe it was a few miles per hour over 25 miles an hour, maybe 25 to 27 miles per hour. cut-through volumes in the Kenwood community since implementation of phase 2 pilot conditions have dropped significantly, both weekday and weekend volumes. But we do not have speed study data for that traffic. We just have counts.
Yeah, thanks for that. And so really the test of this pilot, and please let me know if you can't hear me consistently. The test of this pilot was, will it reduce cut through traffic on Kennedy Drive? And we're happy to report that it has. Okay, we're going to go back to the phone. Elisa Lane, you can unmute yourself.
Oh, thank you for taking my question. Well, it seems to me that the whole impetus of this was the Capitol Crescent crossing, and the fact that somebody got killed crossing there on a bike years ago. And I wonder if it can't be solved by a bridge or a tunnel, how about putting a light there for the pedestrians and cyclers and the cars, and leave the parkway alone. The parkway is such, I don't believe the traffic data, because I use the parkway all the time, but I don't even go there anymore because it's dangerous now to drive on. There's a park 2 blocks away from it called Norwood that you can put all these things, and have events at, and you can do it there. But you talk about parking at the pool. I think there's 30 spaces. So I don't know where people would park to take advantage of these amenities that you plan. And
yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the comment. Kyle, I'm hearing from the Q&A that we also have several follow-up questions about parking. Would you be able to speak to that?
Yeah. So, I think one thing that's important to consider is that when we had the Open Parkways program itself active, so when all 4 lanes of Little Falls were closed down on the weekends, I'm a little newer to parks than others here on the call, so feel free to chime in, but I don't believe we received major complaints about the ability to park to access that open parkway. I think a lot of the users visiting the open parkway are from the adjacent neighborhoods or accessing it via the Capitol Crescent. And so I think that's something that would continue here. If we find that the use, if we activate a pilot park and the use and demand for those parking lots are to the point where it's just a nightmare to try to get there, this is again something as we move forward we can look into and investigate more in a permanent configuration.
Thanks, Kyle. Okay, so we have a follow-up question about traffic lights. Any consideration as to why traffic lights are being considered at intersections along Little Falls Parkway rather than roundabouts, given traffic light switching delays and the dramatic reduction of accidents and fatal accidents in roundabouts? For example, at Dorset, perhaps a roundabout could help improve traffic flow. So I have to say that is a novel question to me. I don't know that that's come up yet. So really appreciate that question. Andrew, has that been considered, or do you have any comment on it?
We haven't studied roundabouts in detail, but generally roundabouts have some disadvantages. That being that their impervious area and overall footprint and impacts are substantially larger than a typical intersection. Certainly roundabouts have their uses, and for roadways where the traffic volumes are suitable, they could be a good idea. But I think we did look at in the facility plan in 2018, 2019, we did preliminarily assess some roundabouts along Little Falls Parkway, and I think that we found that the impact overall to the environment and the stream buffers were just too substantial to really justify their benefit.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. It's an interesting question. We'll go back to the phones. Melissa, can you unmute Allison, please? Thank you.
Hi, yeah, thanks. Thanks for this project. I really salute you all for prioritizing pedestrian and bike safety. and also for increasing park recreational opportunities. I think that's great. I think it's phenomenal to see a department being this inventive and really rising to the situation, especially since, as you guys said, there's so much multifamily housing within the immediate area, and it's definitely a need. It's also weird because for me, Little Falls always seemed so overbuilt compared to almost all the other park roads, pretty much in the state of Maryland, but definitely in this area. And I never really understood why. And I frankly have always hated driving on it because it really seemed to encourage a lot of bullying. There was road rage almost constantly in the past. People were driving so darn fast before, and I now don't mind driving on it in a car or riding on a bike. I do have a question though. Could you clarify, if this is approved, will there be opportunities for amending it? It's a little unclear to me, like how will people moving forward, if it turns out that the bike part of it isn't exactly right or the recreational space isn't being used, how you guys will provide opportunity for feedback, or can you clarify that for me?
Yes, thank you for the question. So that could happen in two phases. One, so again, we're going to the planning board to get the green light or the red light or the roundabout, sorry, about whether or not to proceed. And then we will engage in the design process for a permanent condition. At that point, 100% we would engage the community on what's sort of working well with the pilot condition. What are some of the design changes that need to be made in a permanent condition to increase safety, increase sort of legibility of the roadway. So yeah, 100% we would, in the event that we move forward with design of a permanent condition, we would welcome feedback on that, and there'd be opportunities for that. Hope that answers your question. Okay, we've got a true or false question in the Q&A box. True or false? Little Falls Parkway is considered Capper-Crampton land in that it was purchased using federal funds provided pursuant to that federal law, and is therefore subject to the oversight of the National Capital Planning Commission for development and redevelopment. So yeah, this is Capper, excuse me, I always stumble over it, Capper-Crampton land, and therefore, as I mentioned earlier, we have been coordinating with the National Capital Planning Commission. We've been in regular contact with them, and we would go through their review process in the event that this becomes an official capital project. So I guess true. Okay, we're gonna go to the phones. Lynn Rumberg. Go ahead, Lynn. I can't hear you.
I'm not, I already talked.
Oh. Okay.
Sorry.
Thanks. All right, so we can go back to the Q&A box. If other folks want to speak, they can raise their hands. Next question. Will this new road alignment impact emergency vehicles' ability to get through the area? Lieutenant, are you still on the call? And would you be able to speak to that?
Yes, I'm still here. Yes, emergency vehicles will still be able to get through, this parkway. I know it's not the exact same as Beach and Sligo, but those are also 2-lane parkways that are emergency vehicles as well as fire rescue. Doesn't have any problem getting through. They have green space on either side. It's just like any roadway. If an emergency vehicle is coming, other cars need to yield. I know that park staff did talk to the fire station down in the area, and they don't express any concerns, and park police, we don't have any concerns with being able to access the roadways.
Thank you. We have several questions following up on that.
Sorry, Darren, could I add on to that a little bit?
Please.
We met with Montgomery County Fire Rescue last month, and we presented the current pilot project conditions, and they expressed no concerns with emergency response time with the 2-lane road configuration, which is a configuration found on hundreds of miles of roads in Montgomery County.
Thanks, everybody. We've done a good job getting through questions, so I'm gonna solicit a few more from my staff, my colleague. Okay, the Bethesda pool parking lot is almost always very full in the summer. Isn't it likely that people interested in using the park will park in the surrounding neighborhoods and increase traffic in those neighborhoods? Kai, I think you hit on this briefly. This question may have come in prior to your answer, but why don't you go ahead and answer that again?
Yeah, so as I stated earlier, when we've had the Open Parkways program active previously, to my knowledge, we have not received any complaints about parking difficulties and those lots overflowing or neighborhood parking itself. So I would imagine that condition would likely persist if we activate this pilot scenario. As with any permanent park project, there's a process of design and looking, for public engagement and input. And so if parking comes up as an issue as we look at permanent designs, if we move to that phase, that's something that we can address there.
Okay, thank you. I do see a couple of folks raise their hand to speaking, and I do want to focus on people that haven't had a chance to talk yet. So go ahead, Holly. Holly, you need to unmute yourself and then. Sorry, Holly, we're not hearing you. Okay, sorry, Holly. Let's go to Naomi S.
I believe I'm unmuted now.
Yep, you're good.
Okay. There have been several questions in the Q&A box about the cost of this project, and you've talked about what you've done so far, but you have been very good at not talking about what your cost estimates are for building this out with the various facilities you've talked about, including. I assume that those are in larger amounts of money in the CIP along with other projects, but there must have been work done on coming up with a potential figure for building this out. And I'd like to know what that figure is. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the question. Andy, I'm probably going to throw that to you.
Sure.
I know we don't have a design yet, but.
Well, so just, yes, to give clarity of what we're talking about. If the planning board says, yes, we're going to maintain a 2-lane configuration and they want us to incorporate the right turn lanes and more definitive separations between the vehicular lanes and the non-vehicular lanes, we would use our existing level of effort PDFs or programs to implement that. And again, without having them designed, I think we're talking on the order of something, in the $100, $200, $300,000 to implement that work, which is not uncommon for the numerous projects we do on this parkway, other parkways, and falls well within the budget of our existing budget, level of effort budget for work like this. And I think, as Darren mentioned, a pilot program for a pilot park, we may spend tens of thousands of dollars on temporary amenities, that sort of thing, but a permanent linear park, that would be part of a facility planning process, and that cost could vary significantly, and we We would have different concepts and different ideas, and that would go through a vetting process and with the community and the planning board if they choose to go down that route.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Thanks for the question. So we weren't able to get Holly on the line, but I see a question she had in the Q&A. So I'm going to read that. She says, I'd like to suggest extended bollards in the shoulder from Dorset to Mass Ave until the next phase is initiated to protect pedestrian and bicyclists from confused drivers. So we can look at that. Thanks for the comment. Where is that being located? Sorry, I'm trying to catch up on some of the Q&A box questions. So there's several questions about whether or not Little Falls Parkway should be compared to Sligo Creek Parkway and Beach Drive. How do they compare? So I don't know if somebody, yeah, Andrew, you want to take a shot?
Yeah, sure. So we make that comparison because Sligo Creek Parkway and Beach Drive are both two-lane park roads that were built to provide access to not only stream valley areas, but recreational driving opportunities as well. They're both in populated areas. Sligo Creek Parkway is in Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, Beach Drive is in Kensington. And they both see average daily traffic volumes that are consistent and roughly on par with Little Falls Parkway's current average daily traffic. So we think it's a valid comparison to make.
And also, just in addition to comparing to Sligo and Beach, we have a two-lane section of Little Falls Parkway south of River, which provides another good comparison.
Yeah, it's a great point as well.
Nice. So we've had a number of questions following up about being able to about the roadway being able to handle future traffic increases from development in Westbard and Bethesda, from potentially more workers returning to the office. So Andrew and Brian, would you guys be able to speak again to kind of the projections and confidence there?
Yeah, so that's a point we've discussed during our presentation, is that long-term traffic volumes have been trending down previous to the pandemic and prior to sort of the federal telework being a larger thing than it is now. River Road, Wisconsin Avenue, 2001, starting in 2001, 2003 to 2019, 2018, down 20%. And then Little Falls Parkway, 2016 to 2022, being down 35%. A typical two-lane road with 25 mile per hour speed limit and turn pockets can usually accommodate 20,000 vehicles per day. And right now, Little Falls Parkway is below 11,000. So there is extra capacity there should there be future growth in traffic in the area.
Okay, thank you, Andrew.
And I just want to add that we've been working with DOT on this program for quite a while, and the issue of future growth has come up several times, and the DOT did ask us specifically to do a sensitivity analysis with our modeling for anticipated growth, which Brian could speak to further, but they did provide us parameters for growth sensitivity, and we looked at that, and it was well within the margin of capacity that we have in the two-lane road. But I'll ask Brian to say a couple more words on that.
Sure. To add to what Andy was saying, we used first of all, we used 2016 traffic data, which as you can see in this chart here is much higher than current traffic data. But we added an additional 10% to that as a sensitivity analysis to account for additional traffic that may come from Westbard, whether that materialized or not. I can't say for certain. But we did do what's called a sensitivity analysis that looked at extra volume beyond our already conservative estimate. And just one minor point. This was touched on briefly, but I think what Parks is looking at is an additional capacity with a northbound right turn lane onto Arlington, which that allows for, yeah, thank you. I mean, this type of configuration would allow for basically almost a continuous right turn, because you could turn right on green and you would turn right on red, because there's very little conflicting traffic. In this case, there's actually none, except for the occasional pedestrian across Arlington Road. So, between River Road and Arlington, heading northbound into downtown, you would have almost uninterrupted flow at this intersection with this right turn lane.
Thanks, Brian. So I think we're probably gonna have time for one more phone call. Lynn, Melissa, could you unmute Lynn Battle, please? She hasn't had a chance to speak yet.
Yes, I would just like final clarification on one point. And that is, if I understand you correctly, in March on the 23rd at a hearing and then at a decision on the 30th, the decision will be made to reduce Little Falls to 2 lanes. And everything that happens after that is simply design questions. How are we going to design this linear park? Where are we having right turn lanes, et cetera? But there will not be an opportunity to go back to a 4-lane Little Falls Parkway in the event that the community does not like this linear park, does not find the pilot of having a chess set there, et cetera, worthwhile, and wants to go back to 4 lanes. Am I understanding that correctly?
So the question that we're putting before the planning board is the completeness of the traffic analysis that shows that the 2 lanes are functional, and to ask them for their guidance on converting the area from Arlington to Dorset, or before, north of Dorset, to the 2-lane configuration in the opposing lanes. And then, of course, that would, as we've talked about, would go through a process with the National Capital Planning Commission. It is not asking them about a permanent linear park. We would expect them to, we'd be talking about the activation that some people had mentioned earlier today, temporary activation, which was discussed with some communities. That would be, and they would probably weigh in on that, but a future permanent linear park or other repurposing of the closed lanes would be the subject of a future facility plan, which would have a separate process, community input, and planning board decisions. Right now, we are talking with them about the sufficiency of the traffic analysis that shows the functionality of the 2-lane road.
Yeah, so this is a good point to end on, because we're just at 9 o'clock. And so I'll just summarize by saying the planning board will direct us to maintain the 2-lane configuration or go back to 4 in this March date. And then there'll be plenty of opportunities to envision with the community what worked, what didn't work about the pilot, what's, chess, no chess. We can have lots of conversations about what the best use of space will be moving forward.
And Darren, to clarify, the area between Hillendale and Arlington would not be open to the discussion of going back to 4 lanes. It's been clearly demonstrated that it was unsafe in the 4-lane conditions, and the safety has dramatically been demonstrated to be improved, and the safety improvements are not in question in that area. And we would not be proposing to them to reconsider opening that to 4 lanes. It would just simply not be a safe condition.
With that, I would really like to thank everybody who participated, whether it was through the question and answer box or the phones. Really appreciate the thoughtful questions, the thoughtful comments, and you really encourage folks to use those channels that we mentioned, the email address is on the screen. That's to park staff. Once we get the planning board date finalized, there'll be opportunities to communicate with the planning board in writing. You can certainly do that now. And then there'll be the hearing on the 23rd. So hope to hear from you all then, and really appreciate the discussion. Hope everybody has a great night.
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.